You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Disconnected. We are here doing a little bit of a catch-up with somebody that we talked to earlier this year. We got the director, filmmaker, writer, and everything extraordinaire, Damian Lahey. Thanks for coming back on, sir.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to be back on here. I had a wonderful time speaking with you last time. And you know what? I want to kick things off with some holiday physical media and discussion.
Sure.
real quick, because I am still here in Pakistan. I'm in Karachi. Yeah. It's early morning here. I'm having some coffee, and I was recently doing some shopping, right, for Christmas. Some Christmas shopping, some holiday shopping,
as you do.
And what I wanted to, and I was talking to some friends of mine, and when we were younger, our parents would be the ones that would like surprise us with gifts.
Of course.
Right. But now, for years, now that I'm older, like, I'm the one that surprises them with gifts. and they just ask me to shoot them some Amazon links. You know what I mean? And so it's like reverse. Like, I'm the one that, bends into a pretzel trying to get all these thoughtful, clever, and creative gifts, just like they used to when I was in grade school and in high school. And they're the ones now that are, just get the obvious stuff, that get me the obvious stuff, right? They're just like, don't forget to send us a couple links on on Black Friday for what you want. But I was doing that, so I was looking for a couple things, and I was looking at the prices on Amazon. And one thing that I've tracked, and you and I have kind of talked about this, is I've kind of been tracking how, not just in Amazon, but in general, the deals that companies have been rolling out aren't very enticing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like you're seeing a lot of 17% off. Like up to 40% off. Like a couple of years back, for Amazon, it wasn't up to 40% off. It was up to 70% off.
Right.
And I was looking at the steel books, and during the pandemic, I scooped up, and before the pandemic, I scooped up quite a few cool steel books. And, I picked up that Scarface steel book, the Blues Brothers one that had the alternate cut of the movie on there, the Bridge Over River Kwai steel book, nice. Those more artistic design ones they were doing there.
Yeah.
And I picked up, Rock and Roll High School, which was
nice.
Awesome. I got that steel book. But again, those were in the context of those being movies that I kind of already wanted to have in my collection. And I got the steel book because of the flash sales, because the flash sales, the steel book was in some cases cheaper than the standard version.
Very true. Yeah. It seems like they want to get rid of those. Yeah.
And so that was kind of during the pandemic. And, I'm not gonna, I'm not ashamed to say that I'm on a budget.
We all should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always trying to find good deals on these things. So, and I got them all. Like, Amazon was constantly having flash sales on those things.
Oh yeah.
And I got most of those between $8.99 and $17.99. I think $17.99 for Fargo is the most I paid. $8.99 was the cheapest, and I got Snatch, Steelbook, And then, but most of them I was scooping up for like $12.99. You know, like the Psycho Steelbook and the Zombieland Steelbook. You know, etc. Right.
And around that time, they were pushed by Best Buy. All that competition.
Yes. And actually, Snatch I got from Best Buy actually.
There you go.
And so I got, you know, I splurged and I got a Mondo edition of Ghost in a Shell that I like splurged and bought myself as a to Damian from Damian birthday present one year. So that was like $25. And that was the I don't know if you were aware, but there were two versions of Ghost in the Shell available.
Yep.
There was one that was like super digitally remastered. And then there was one that retained the more like film quality.
Right.
You know, and depending on your taste, your preference, you could get either or. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But both were available. So I got that one. But I was looking at the Steelbooks on the Black Friday on Amazon. And, you know, the deals were not very good, right? And then I wound up, and here's kind of like the unspoken rule with my family when it comes to like gifts around the holidays. It's like, you know, err on the special edition, right? Because it's the holidays. So it's like if you're going to get somebody a book, you usually get the hardback, right? If you get somebody a movie, it's usually the 2-disc special edition, whatever, you know? And so I also try to pick out things we can all watch together, right? So,
of course.
I got a Steelbook for the Guns of Navarone. I shot my parents the links to that. And I think that was like $22.
Yep.
And that was on sale. And that was like on the cheaper side.
Oh yeah.
And that was just I believe the Blu-ray. I'm not sure if it has the 4K in it. I don't do 4K, so I don't care. I noticed that they eliminated a lot of the Blu-ray only.
Correct.
You know, as if there's like propping up this narrative that 4K just like dominated the scene, which didn't happen. You know what I mean? They just want to push it. So
to a point, yeah. It's caught on.
I mean, it's caught on a little bit, but I mean, not to the point where you're like no longer selling Blu-ray Steelbooks. Like I know those Steelbooks are available. You know what I mean? They're just not on the website. You know, the company either had, you know, told them to ship them back or do whatever to push the 4K. You know,
any of the newer titles are almost entirely not getting Blu-ray Steelbooks at all. They're really sticking to 4K, sometimes 4K Blu-ray combo packs, but there really are not being made many more of the Blu-ray only Steelbooks. Right.
And that's that's an adoption by force. Right.
To a point, yeah.
And so I went ahead and got that. Right. So I haven't seen the Guns of Navarone in forever.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it'll be a good thing when I come back. I'm going to be back in the States in the summer.
Nice.
Right. So I'll you know, when I'll be, you know, spending time with the folks. So we'll definitely have that to look forward to. But it was interesting checking that out. I did get my dad the support your local sheriff, support your local gunfighter. I got my dad those on Blu-ray by Kino.
Nice.
That'll be a nice surprise for him. He won't see that coming. I got my mom the Dances with Wolves 2-disc Blu-ray.
Nice.
I almost got her the Steelbook for that, but I noticed that the 2-disc Blu-ray has like a different cut of the movie on it.
Yeah, and that was an odd one. Shout did this thing where they had a limited Steelbook that had 10,000 print run, and then that sold out, and then a handful of months later they said, oh, we're reprinting another Steelbook that has a 10,000 print run. The only thing that's different is the cover of the steel.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got the one that I got isn't steel. It's 2 discs, and it's got like a director's cut of the movie on it. And to be honest, I had never heard of a director's cut for that film.
Right.
Things get blurry with uncut and director's cuts now.
Of course, yeah.
Because it kind of used to be, extreme examples are the best to use. You had the famous Once Upon a Time in America example.
Right.
Right. But that's like, that's like an outlier. And then you do have like other films. Obviously, the uncut version of Dead Alive is superior to the cut one that some video stores got in the 90s. That's another extreme example. But then you see a lot of, especially with the horror, where it's like the theatrical version is the superior version. It's the version that the director approved and prefers. Yet we also have an uncut version. That's not a better movie.
It's bloated usually.
Yeah, and it has just like either more. It usually just has like more gore for the gore hounds, right? But but it confuses it because people are sometimes, they think of those examples of, oh man, the director's cut is superior. They think of Once Upon a Time in America or like the Dead Alive thing. It's like, oh, I've got to get the director's cut. Like I got the Amadeus with the director's cut. And there's a couple of scenes in there that are like, that one are not necessary to the movie, but they're also like, the direction and the acting is like film school quality.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was just a poorly produced scene, and it happens. You know what I mean? For any number of reasons. Like there's a reason that this scene shouldn't be in Amadeus. Like tonally, it stinks. The acting is bad. You know what I mean? But there it is in the director's cut.
Yep.
And that's a thing where it's not really the, what it sometimes gets blurred as to what's the preferred version. And sometimes the producers are right. Sometimes the director isn't right.
Quite often, yeah.
And you see from just like all the mistakes that get made by directors, and again, a lot of it goes back to that Once Upon a Time in America example, the like, or like Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, the like evil studio, the evil studio trying to compromise the director's vision. And it's like, look, man, I've read a couple of books on Sam Peckinpah. He was irresponsible and completely shit-faced on that set.
On most sets.
on most sets. But if he had cared about his director's vision so much, he could have tightened up. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So that's and I know Criterion just put out like a 4-disc version of that. I was an early adopter of that movie, and that's one of those movies where Sam Peckinpah is one of my main guys coming up, that inspired me to get into film and all that. And I just want to say that, and I am just like an avid, like I am like a pretty big Bob Dylan fan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm a very big Bob Dylan fan. So like Bob Dylan, Sam Peckinpah, to me, that was like a killer combination. And I've probably seen that movie 15 times. Like I had the first director's cut that came out. And I think it's a good movie at best. Like I would love to be able, every time that I watch it, I would love to be able to like join the ranks of it's a masterpiece. But I just can't. Like I think some of it is like inept. Some of it is like a Jess Franco movie. You know what I mean? Like the basics of like filmmaking. like just eye lines don't match. Like there's one scene where like the film is like oddly sped up. You can tell it's a mistake. I mean, it's truly like there's moments, especially the beginning. The beginning is super clever, amazing. Bob Dylan's score is awesome.
Yeah.
I just think it's needlessly. I think it's sloppy, and so I watched another cut of it. I got the DVD, which had like 3 cuts on it. Did you ever get that version?
Not the DVD. No, I honestly, I've not even seen the film ever. This is one that has eluded me, and I just got the Criterion version when they released it, and it's on my list for coming up here soon after I finish a couple more of these projects.
And so I got that version, and then what was weird about that version is that it took away some things that I thought were really cool in the first director's cut.
Right.
And then like in my opinion, it kind of broke even. You know what I mean? So I know that, and I have some very, very dear friends that swear by that movie. But that's one that I think it's good. You know what I mean? Like I think it gets to good, but I don't think it's great. And
yeah,
I think
understandable.
I think it reflects the behavior, of the director, which,
right,
was well documented as certainly contributing to the film's demise. There's just no way you can come down. And I'm not a bootlicker for the studios, you know what I mean? For studio executives. But, sometimes, it takes 2 to tango. And, that's one of those cases where like the homeboy was just fucked up, and didn't do himself any favors, just like really self-destructive. Now, I will say this. Have you heard the Pecos Blues?
I don't think so.
Okay, Pecos Blues. So when Bob Dylan came in for a couple sessions to record the soundtrack for Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, they just left the tape rolling for like the entire thing. So you hear like all the behind the scenes conversations with Bob Dylan talking to the studio people, and then like just candid conversations, and then James Coburn comes in and talks to Bob Dylan, and they run through a bunch of the songs and all this. It's awesome. It's called Pecos Blues. I'll go ahead and send you the link. I actually think that's better than the friggin' movie. Again, I've seen it 15 times, so obviously it's got stuff that keeps me coming back. Right, you know what I mean? Right. I just wish, I just kind of always go back to that one, like hoping it's going to be a better movie. So, and you mentioning that 4-disc Criterion, Sam Peckinpah, Pat Garrett, and Billy the Kid deal. I have a question for you.
Shoot, yeah.
Like, have you ever experienced, like, have you ever watched, has it been so dramatic, right? Like remastering, especially when we're talking about like Blu-ray to 4K. Has it ever taken a 2-star movie and made it a 4-star movie for you?
I honestly, yeah, there have been a couple times that I have definitely reevaluated that way. I don't know that it was necessarily only due to the remaster. I know that there were some times that I saw films early in my film appreciation that I either didn't have the life experiences to really appreciate yet, or I was simply too young and naive to really understand them yet. But beyond that, there's also some things that I just simply did not like the look and feel of. But later on, when they were either clearer or handled properly, at least, it went, oh, wait. There was a good movie hidden in there. And now that you can see the details, this means quite a bit more.
Now, has that been the same cut of the film?
Oh yeah, pretty much every time. Yeah, I really try to keep when I'm comparing stuff like that fairly 1-to-1.
Right.
Obviously, if something happens internally and they're changing something, we can't control that. But yeah, I tend to watch the same cuts that I did previously.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. What do you see as a I was speaking with our dear friend Michelle Kisner about a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Somebody posted a very good, and I'm sorry I don't have the guy's name. Somebody posted a very good YouTube video about physical media collecting.
Right.
And he called out, and I think in our first chat, our first fireside chat, as it were, we talked about this kind of revisionist
right
evaluation, this inability to criticize anything that we purchase, not us, but that collectors in general. And this chap on his YouTube fellow was just talking about how it's created this epidemic of revisionism. Like nobody wants to admit that some of these movies aren't very good. Like even though it's like subjective, it's all subjective. It's like it's created this like bizarre reluctance to be critical of these movies because you feel like you're being critical of the boutiques, like their fancy box sets and all their packaging and all that stuff, which amounts to, and this is his words, not mine, polishing a turd.
Right.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's a couple things. I certainly agree that many of the movies getting these giant bells and whistles releases simply do not warrant that. They are not great films. That being said, I will counter the argument of an epidemic of not being able to criticize those things. Like, for example, on my show, I tend to really only talk up things that I like. And I've been personally criticized before. People have said that I'm a yes man and I'm only here to... I had somebody tell me that the labels were paying me to be positive about their releases.
Oh,
and
really?
I've literally been accused of that. And I had to explain, like, if I spend 2.5 hours watching a movie and going through some bonus features and I don't like it, why would I want to come onto my show and talk about that for 15 minutes? To me, that's not fun. I don't get enjoyment out of that, out of talking about why a movie was bad. I would much rather spend 15 minutes talking about a movie that moved me personally, or that was relevant to my life, or had some sort of impact on me. And yeah, there are some weeks where, I may watch 4 films and I can gush about 2 of them on my show and say that I watched them. I may not even mention the other 2 that I watched if they were just straight garbage. That being said, I think there are certain times where people are wanting to hear somebody that does, like I do, break from the mold a little bit. So every once in a while, I'll throw something in and say, I watched this and it wasn't good. But, that doesn't mean that I'm sharing that you're going to think it was bad, but just the fact that I didn't like it, so that people understand I do not like everything. But that's, I don't know. I think, we hear the words echo chamber a lot, when a lot of people really don't comprehend that it doesn't have to be an echo chamber to always sound positive. It simply could be when you're trying to be, immersed in other people that are watching these things that are good are more enjoyable than things that are bad. I would much rather talk about, classics than something that is, a 1.3 on Letterboxd that is awful.
Right. And I understand that. And a lot of it's context and the position you're in. You know what I mean? Like I always,
of course,
I hesitate, and certainly publicly on my wall and things like that. You don't see me very often. You'll never see me on social media posting anything negative about movies. There's a couple of groups that and I'm very careful with how I word criticism, because look, I'm a really small filmmaker, you know what I mean, and screenwriter,
right,
whatever. And so it would look ridiculous if I'm just like, talking out my ass, like shredding like master filmmakers. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that everybody, you know, we all go through that phase when we're in our 20s. But once you get to a certain point, you understand how the industry works and how much goes into it. And you can kind of, you know, if you learn how to contextualize yourself properly and you have some sort of self-awareness, you know, you don't do, you know, you have to be mindful of your place. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
For lack of a better word.
Yep.
You know, and I think that the way that I look at it is, you know, there's some things that are going to be released that are of lesser quality because of the artist's standing, and it's almost like for academic purposes, right? Like,
right.
So Bob Dylan is going to have everything released because he's like one of the most important artists in the history of the world.
Right.
Right. So even his 80s turkeys get their due, you know? So Sam Peckinpah is such an influential filmmaker, such a unique filmmaker, and he has such an ardent fan base that everything's going to be released. Right. Now, when I see clunkers like the Osterman Weekend and Convoy getting 4-disc box sets, you know, obviously I kind of roll my eyes. You know, again, Sam Peckinpah, you know, he's a master. He's one of my heroes. You know what I mean? One of the guys that, you know, got me started. And again, but, you know, when I see that, I roll my eyes a little bit, but then I'm like, hey, it's Sam Peckinpah. You know what I mean?
Course,
this is like for academic purposes. But, you know, when I see just like, you know, standalone films that don't have that kind of narrative along with them. And, you know, when I see these films and I know enough of the people that are in this side of the industry, and I know when these films were released on Blu-ray that they didn't sell.
Right.
And now I see them coming out in like 4K, like 3-disc sets. You know, and then I see more and more, not just, I'm not talking about your announcements, but just like when because I have, you know, my social media feed is loaded with Cinemaniacs, right? And they're always popping up announcements and stuff. But I see more and more people kind of being a little, you know, making kind of snide comments.
Yeah.
You know, and then you kind of run into like signposts, right? Like you and I have talked about, like you remember when I shared with you that completely insane box set for John Lennon's Mind Games?
Yes, I went and watched the video for that thing. It was insane.
Yeah, and to me, that's the sort of peak event that happens before a decline.
Right.
And, you know, I couldn't help when I saw the like Uber edition for Barbed Wire with Pamela Anderson or whatever, you know, that kind of made me that, you know, and that came out like during a week of like heavy announcements of like of films that are generally regarded as like 1-star, 2-star, like just, you know, turkeys, like, you know, I think what was that Cindy Crawford movie with the Baldwin guy that was also a flop? I think that was getting some sort of reissue, but whatever, you know. And again, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But when I saw that, like when I saw the Barbed Wire, the Uber edition or whatever, that kind of gave me, you know, flashbacks to the Image Comics bubble of the 90s. You know what I mean? Where it was like everything that they could publish was like getting a super mid edition. Like, here's Jim Lee's sketches for the Wildcats cartoon show in a glossy cover.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you were getting that kind of like gimmicky stuff, and there wasn't a lot of there, and they were doing like victory laps for things that like people that had no like legacy, that like people weren't asking for. I was getting a similar vibe from that. And I know that, you know, you've probably as the publisher of the Physical Media Advocate, right? You probably have your own kind of pet peeves or whatever, and your own thoughts on that. What are some of those?
You know, one that I actually just printed in the November issue of the Physical Media Advocate is how, we can all rant about how Disney has locked up titles in their vault, and not just their titles, but all the Fox titles, all the Touchstone titles, all the Hollywood Picture titles, all of these movies that many of us would love to have huge, great 4K releases for. They've locked many of those up, and that's, you know what, that's their prerogative, sure. What really pissed me off is just a couple months ago, they announced that they are giving an official VHS release to Alien Romulus. Now, normally, sure, whatever, nostalgia bait, go right ahead, that's fine. But the fact that you're holding back all these classics while releasing this brand new movie on VHS at the same time is just, extra ballsy in a way. And it is so unnecessary. Why are we doing VHS in 2024?
Is it letterbox? Is it widescreen?
I believe it is, yeah.
Well, here's my thing. Well, first off, that's like them trying to be hip, right? Hip and retro.
Yeah, exactly.
But, that's another... I actually remember, how many months ago was that when that was announced? 2 months ago?
Yeah, I think it was announced in October or September, and then I think it literally just released in the last couple of weeks.
Well, that to me is another signpost of an extreme kind of thing before a decline.
Right.
Right, where it's almost absurd, However, something like that as a one-off, could sell. I'm not sure how over that movie was. I know it was pretty pop, it was fairly hot.
Oh yeah, it did very well.
It did well. I thought it was very enjoyable, except the last 20 minutes. I agree with those that said the last 20 minutes it completely, if it wasn't for the last 20 minutes of that movie, I'd probably go back and watch it again.
Right.
But those last 15 minutes or so was hard on my soul. So I went into it expecting that, because a lot of people had mentioned that when they were discussing the film. And I was watching it and I was just like, oh man, I'm totally into it. This is cool. I thought it skewed a little too young adult, but
right.
the way they used the original android was very clever, I thought. So I was into it. And then I was like, oh man, I was like, I've only got 15 minutes left and this is still holding strong. And then I was like, oh Lordy. And then it was it was all the main, what was weird about the last 15, 20 minutes is that it was all the stuff from the previous 3 movies that everybody was unanimously this is terrible. This is ruining this series. They crammed all of that into the last 15 minutes of that movie. And I was like, wow. I was like, wow. So, but however, it was still, that's a movie. If it came on TV, I would probably, I got to backpedal on what I said. I would probably watch it again. Because I thought it had a really good texture. I thought it was well made. Now going back to your point about all the movies that they're holding, that Disney is holding back.
Yep.
I think that they would be. Look, the House of Mouse has gone through a little bit of a downturn. They've been historically, they've always had downturns, right? People seem to act like every time Disney has a downturn that the entire company is going to go belly up.
Right.
They were saying that in the years leading up to A Little Mermaid.
This is true.
And then they were saying that after Pocahontas bombed, Pocahontas finished off their big winning streak. And then, actually, I think that still did okay, but Hunchback of Notre Dame definitely killed it. But
right.
I don't want to get into all that, but then they came back with Toy Story. Anyway, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
There's no situation. Disney just came off of like the most successful run in like the history of Hollywood.
Right.
You know what I mean? In the history of Hollywood. And you have these jerk offs on their YouTube channels, right? They're all my age, which I think is hilarious. They're all my age and like purport to be like film historians and like know their stuff, but they don't. They're like completely ignorant. They don't know the history of the business. They don't know the history of Disney. They don't know the history of like just about anything that they're talking about.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, you know, as soon as there's like, been a weakness there. And look, I'm no mark for the House of Mouse, right? I'm no mark for the House of Mouse. And watching them make the kind of mistakes that they used to never make was pretty interesting. And now, look, all the issues with Marvel and all the issues with Star Wars, those are all obvious things that everybody talked to death, right? So we don't need to, retrace any of that. But what I do want to do is tie it into what you said. And I think that there is a hesitancy based on their last couple years of like huge flops, right? Like Indiana Jones, right?
Yep.
And other animated movies that they had and Marvel movies that didn't do so hot. So I think there's a hesitancy to maybe like roll out it in the midst of like a tidal wave of releases to maybe, push for that, right? Now, at the same time, I have heard, and I wanted to ask you about this. I've heard that they have been doing a lot of like super limited edition, like very pricey steelbooks, going back to the steelbook thing that I was originally talking about. What are your thoughts on that? What have you heard about that? What's the deal?
For some newer releases, that is absolutely the case. So the two biggest, most egregious ones from them over the last handful of months were Inside Out 2, that newest Pixar film, and then the new Marvel movie, Deadpool and Wolverine. Both of those came in a 4K steelbook that were sold out. We're talking sold out either on pre-order or in the first week of release. And Disney steelbooks historically, since the I don't want to say the heyday, but over the last 4 or 5 years, with Best Buy holding strong on release day, those have historically been $34.99. And when Inside Out 2 released, it was, I believe, $45 or $44.99, whatever, somewhere around there. Even worse, the Deadpool and Wolverine, most sites held that to like $55 to even in some places $60 for a brand new steelbook of just the most bland superhero, not even a special edition.
But let's be honest here, though. Like, but first, I have a question. What's the secondary market on those?
They're probably hitting around $100 right now.
Okay. So that's like Taylor Swift money. So I will say this, though, is that both of those movies were legitimately successful films.
Oh, of course.
All right. So, that needs to be said.
I mean, okay. Yeah, they were successful,
because but those were tremendously successful movies, right? That have that have a large audience that's going to be looking for gifts over the holidays. Now, I do think the pricing is egregious. Now, the pricing on all of this stuff, especially the vinyl stuff, and has gone up tremendously, right? And so, I am looking at, it's very, very easy. Look, if you're a household, right, and it's part of your family dynamic to collect, your teenage kids are into it, look, man, and you have to spend either you're going to spend either $35 on Barbarian Queen 2, or you're going to get your kids, Deadpool and Wolverine for $45. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it's going to go the more popular route, and look, that just is what it is. But the problem with that is that, I don't even know if it's a problem, but I think it's like a systemic, sorry if I'm talking over my words. It's a systemic issue that and I don't want to get into a shareholder value conversation, right? But it's squeezing every last drop, right? And I think you have Disney also in a situation where they hadn't had a couple of big hits in a while. So they're trying to juice Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine for as much as they can, because those are their two biggies. You know what I mean? Look, they're definitely not selling tons of steel books for Ant-Man Quantumania.
Unfortunately, I do know that is false. They sold a shit ton of steelbooks of Ant-Man Quantumania.
Did they?
Oh, they did.
Okay,
literally thousands upon thousands.
So who is the? Because that was generally derided as a mediocre title, but like, are those collectors or are those parents buying for kids that are like still on the Marvel train? You think
most of them are collectors? Absolutely. There are people that have literally every single Marvel movie in a 4K steelbook, and they don't want to stop because that's what they're collecting, or that's one of the things they're collecting. And I don't think we're in a situation where these two were popular, so they chose to raise the price at all. I think one of the things that led to this is the fact that Sony took over the production for them. So Sony Pictures is now doing their authoring for their discs and handling all manufacturing. And they have also started raising price on certain things, which is odd. They're not doing it really for catalog titles, but like the newest Planet of the Apes movie was also exorbitantly priced. And so they're being selective about some newer things. And what's crazy is they'll sell out. It might only be like a 6,000 to 8,000 print run in those first couple weeks where they'll be sold out. But for many of these titles, we'll find a year and a half later, they'll just release another steelbook and it'll be regularly priced.
Right. But but I understand that. But you're always going to see some of that. You said yourself it's targeted a little bit. You're going to have things targeted based on,
of course, a little bit,
how popular they are. Like you and I, grew up in the era of CDs, right. So like you remember going to the CD store and
every Tuesday,
and the Beatles albums were always $4 more than everybody else. The Beatles albums were always the most expensive.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
But I think the difference there is that word always. What is interesting here is that it suddenly happened on a couple of titles. So this wasn't even the most popular MCU film over the last couple of years. And I do think it has more to do with Sony taking over because of that. Because they've never done that ever.
So they're just experimenting with pricing?
That, honestly, that is what I said earlier this year. I think they're trying to find a new minimum price point. And so Planet of the Apes and Deadpool versus Wolverine and Inside Out 2 were all released at 3 different prices, roughly $45, $55, and $65.
And this is the 4th Planet of the Apes movie you're talking about, right? This isn't the first trilogy steelbook?
No.
Was that even released?
Yes, it was. All of them have all gotten steelbooks, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
So yeah, because they were all about $10 difference, that was my idea earlier this year, is I bet they're trying to see what is the minimum or what is the maximum amount that we can sell out a limited run in that first couple weeks.
Well, you have to give right. And you have to kind of you have to diversify your portfolio, so to speak, right? So like if you have, for example, like David Bowie I'm going to use a vinyl example. Like David Bowie had a box set for the Hunky Dory album, right?
Right.
And it was this big box set you could get for the album, right? And the box set included an alternate version of the album, right? With like, different mixes and whatever, different song selection.
Right.
So that was released, right? But then you could also purchase that alternative album and the new remaster or whatever it was of the original album that was, released separately. Right. So basically you're, for like parents that have a daughter that's big into, or a son that's big into David Bowie, right? And you want to get them something special, you can buy them both of those albums, right? You can buy the new version of the new reissue of Hunky Dory. You can get the alternate version of the album, right? And if you're on a budget, it saves you $70 from having to buy the box set, right? So like you have alternate versions, like so for example, that Opera 4K, right?
Yep.
The they released that, what was it, 4 or 5 discs?
Yeah, the giant one.
Yeah, but then they went ahead and months later they just released for Black Friday. They have the standard version, right? But that's following the model that's following both the Blu-ray, both the physical media movie market and the vinyl market kind of follow a similar thing. So the whole idea of releasing a box set and then you break up the box set and sell it in smaller, cheaper pieces later. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. That's very, very common. Yes.
Because you're going to have, whether it's, vinyl or whether it's physical media, right? Whether it's movies, which is now kind of a thing. And it's kind of, it's been a thing for a while, but not at this peak frenzy level, right? Wouldn't you agree? So you're going to have the early adopters, right?
Right.
So that are going to buy all this stuff when it's new. And they're never going to believe that anything's going to be around for a while or it's going to go on sale. So for example, when the Rolling Stones mono box set came out a couple years ago, right? There's only 10,000, everybody's going crazy. All these people are going to buy it. Right?
Of course.
Because it's going to sell out. That box set is still available on Amazon for way cheaper. But that's everything. But you're always going to have those early adopters. So whenever you're watching YouTube, whenever I'm watching YouTube channels or I'm looking at the social media posts for these boutique film releasing companies, and I'm also watching YouTube stuff for vinyl. I have my YouTube channels that I listen to for vinyl and stuff like that.
Yep.
Both have one thing in common, and that is in the comments, there's always the early adopters, and it's the same comments. My wallet's going to be killing me. My wife might leave me, but I have to have this. We were going to go to Disney World, but I've got to jump on this or it's going to sell out. You know what I mean? These are people that are borderline addicts.
Oh, that's not borderline. They absolutely are.
You know what? Well, I didn't want to, I'm a guest on the podcast trying
I'll say it.
So yes. They are certainly an extreme version of that. You know what I mean? But you have to realize though, just as with the comic book, situation in the 90s or, the vinyl situation now and the boutique stuff is that if if you're only generating releases for that level of buyer, that level of collector.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're leaving the casual hundreds of millions behind, right? And especially some of these companies don't seem interested in marketing what they're selling to anything outside of the bubble. You know what I mean? And eventually the bubble bursts, right?
Right. So recently you also wrote an article for Dread Central, and it's kind of apt for 2024 as a whole, where many people are feeling like everything's on fire. And God hell, you're not even in the U.S. You're over in the Middle East right now, and your article that you wrote about is watching horror movies when everything around you is a horror movie as well. Tell us where that came from.
That, it's funny. I had actually wanted to write that for quite some time, and as you know, in the article it talks about when I originally became kind of more aware in global events, and not that I was, I always prided myself, kind of like it says in the piece. I don't want to be redundant there,
right.
But I've always prided myself on being aware of what's going on in the world. I think it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to you if you're a writer, if you're an artist of any kind.
Of course.
I also think that when you're in entertainment spaces, I think that people have a tendency to get in a bubble. And my heroes are, folks like Paul Newman, and Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
Right. And because of Audrey Hepburn's work with UNICEF, that's something that I'm developing here in Karachi, in Pakistan. And Denzel Washington, reach one, teach one. He's one of my heroes. Anyway, the folks that I kind of admired the most, even on the rock and roll side of things, with Bruce Springsteen, these are people that the more acclaim, right, that they achieved, the more they gave back and acknowledged, horrors of the world. You know what I mean? Not in an obnoxious way. No one's ever going to accuse Audrey Hepburn of being obnoxious,
right.
In her humanitarian efforts. But that's an entire generation that wouldn't have known about organizations like UNICEF if it wasn't for the fact that they were fans of her.
Right.
You know what I mean? And Audrey Hepburn obviously benefited from having a legacy, an enduring legacy and popularity that lasted decades after she, retired from the business.
Yeah.
And, has since passed away. She's her filmography is pretty amazing in that she chose a lot of good projects that were ahead of their time.
Right.
So some of her projects that were popular at the time that have since become a little dated, they're balanced out by the stuff that she did that was like really ahead of its time, right? Like The Children's Hour or Two for the Road.
Yeah.
And things like that. Or like Robin and Marion, So that's where so I think that to answer your question, that I kind of wanted to discuss that. And I thought there was a opportunity to write a piece like that, because I try to also pay attention to kind of what's out there, and so whenever you're crafting an article for whatever reason it might be, you don't want it to be a piece that, has been done before. Right. Like for example, perfect example of this. I actually had an idea that I was going to write a piece about John Carpenter's The Ward. and it was going to be called, Production Design and John Carpenter's The Ward. And it was going to discuss how, even though The Ward was kind of like this film that a lot of people put down, from a production design standpoint, it's one of his most consistent films from a production standpoint.
Right.
It's one of his most consistent films. So many of John Carpenter's movies, the production value fluctuates like wildly, where like sometimes you'll see like, oh my gosh, this incredibly like well-crafted set piece. And then like you'll watch like the following scene that like looks like it costs like $17 to make. You know what I mean? And
Oh, yeah.
and that inconsistency in John Carpenter's work always kind of fascinated me. You know what I mean? And it just, you know, again, it goes to show how difficult it is in this business, even when you have all those resources available, how to allocate everything, how to balance everything out right. You know what I mean? And you're not always going to get, you know, Starman or The Thing. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Or, you know, Halloween, right?
Well, and even many of those were put down for a multitude of reasons back in the day.
Right, exactly. And so what happened, though, was that while I was kind of like putting some notes together for that, like 3 articles like reevaluating the Ward came out. Like all of a sudden it was like the Ward Appreciation Month in the horror space. You know what I mean? And I was I can't go, you know, I can't go forward with this. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to shelve this one for another 2 decades. You know what I'm saying?
It's sort of weird how cyclical many of those things are. It seems like you don't hear anything about some certain subject, and then for a month, that's all you will hear about. Even big things like you won't hear anything about George A. Romero except for the Dead trilogy that he did originally, and then all of a sudden, while you're planning something to write about Bruiser, there will be 9 different reappreciations, 7 YouTube videos, and a brand new podcast all dedicated to Bruiser.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's funny when he came to our film school and visited. He actually screened Bruiser. That was like one of his first screenings of that film. But the article seemed like the time to write it, and so look, it felt good getting it out there. Dread Central had just done the interview with Christina.
Yeah,
while we were doing the promotion for the release of Opera and Simple Like Silver.
Well, and one really great thing about this article is there's no easy way to say this, I guess, but it's like the opposite of gatekeeping. It's trying to tell people that no matter your worldview on this subject, you're not alone, because there's other people like you, and not enough people are saying something like that specifically. And it's important in a time where, you know, we're hearing on one far end of the spectrum is all of a sudden these movies are too political, and then the other end of the spectrum is, you know, looking to make a difference with art, you know, coming against politics in a way. There's got to be a balancing point for both, but in all reality, politics have always been a part of art, and it always will be. That's one of the biggest aspects of art.
Man, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, nobody is more message heavy than probably Sidney Lumet. And I see so many filmmakers, film fanatics that decree the modern politics in cinema,
right?
And they'll use Sidney Lumet as an example whenever somebody talks about his movies. They'll be like, "Oh man, I wish movies could go back to that, where they didn't have all this politics." And
right.
it doesn't. They always reference these directors that made political movies with a lot of heavy socio-political messaging in them.
Look at The Verdict.
And, The Verdict, 12 Angry Men. What's that Running on Empty, right? Isn't that the one with River Phoenix with that's like heavy political stuff, you know? Even if you're talking about police corruption, right? With Serpico and Prince of the City.
Of course.
So I think that there's, when you talk about a balance, is that one thing that I want people to be aware of too is that these filmmakers and these screenwriters, they're not as many of them are activists as people would like to believe.
Right.
And that's both a positive and a negative. All right. And the bottom line is the bottom line, right? So when you see a large number of female-led movies coming out, or female lead action movies, right? Like, how many variations of La Femme Nikita have we seen in the last 10 years, right?
Right.
Like, very few of the producers behind those movies are doing so because they care about female empowerment or feminism or, have a statement about gender roles.
Yeah, their job is to make money no matter what.
Yeah, they're producing those movies because they think they will make money.
Right.
And as soon as that trend wears itself into the ground, because that's the history of the business. The history of the business, going back to the very beginning, the 1910s, is in the 20s, is running every trend then into the ground, right? Finding a new trend, right? And then running that one and into the ground. And then a decade or so later, it becomes kitsch or it becomes hip to revisit the other trend. Or there's a parody cycle, right? Where you have to like make fun of it, right? Kind of like the original with the Universal Monsters, right? They had to, they ran that into the ground in the 40s, and they had to kind of poke fun at themselves with Abbott and Costello, right?
Right.
So what a lot of folks need to understand is that a lot of this current trend, right, is fueled by, I don't want to say the word cynicism, but a lot of the people producing this content, they don't see these trends as anything more than another version of 3D, right? They see it as a gimmick that's hot, that makes money now, and therefore we're going to do this. And so when you hear people complain about it or they push back against it, they seem to always want this kind of like agenda. Like there's like all of these people like producing this content are like activists, right? And it's like, no, like the majority of them are not. Now are there some that have an agenda? Of course, some of them that agenda is genuine and comes from a good space. Some of them might come from a good space, but they don't have the talent to get it out there properly, right? That happens too. However, when I was coming up and it was nothing but Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, Clint Eastwood, Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, like there wasn't, like there's not libraries of journalism about how it's male activists that are destroying Hollywood with a male agenda and et cetera, right? But as soon as you have a couple years of the trend going the other way, like you've got folks having nervous breakdowns. Like they can't even, like they don't know how to handle it, And so, look, I always say this. And it's not, just the horror space, obviously. It's all, it's the other fan spaces, right? But it's not, and people always look for a reason, right? We're definitely at a very difficult time in our society and in the world. But you know how Carl Sagan made the comment about how the bamboozled never want to admit that they've been bamboozled, right?
Of course.
Like, it's easier to blame Kathleen Kennedy and Ray for your alcoholism and for not being able to keep a job and all of the, bad marriage. It's easier to blame them for the socio-economic conditions of the time than it is to say, hey, I voted for politicians that screwed me over. Or I listened to the wrong people, or I made the wrong decisions. Now, I'm just saying that's, that applies to a more extreme segment right? That I've listened to. You know, it's time at a certain age, right? When you're in your when you're in your 40s and you have kids, you know, and you know your passion, right, is going on a, you know, social media space, a virtual space, and publishing these screeds, these hysterical screeds about Madam Web, about how Madam Web destroyed, you know, Spider-Man.
Right.
Right. And, you know, you're somebody that also, you know, it's somebody, and I see this often, is folks that are also posting in the same spaces about, you know, they, you know, struggling with the job, struggling with bills, and, you know, have kids, and, you know, I think that it's time to look at the priorities and be like, you know, my passion, my energy, where should that go? Should it go to Madam Web?
It's a great question.
Know, possibly not. Madam Web is where your passion, frustration, and anger go. But for many, it's easier than facing hard truths and looking themselves in the mirror, right? Looking at the world and looking, you know, it's a very tumultuous time, and people have a lot of bottled up resentment, and it's going to manifest itself in other ways, right? It's going to seep through the cracks, as it were,
right?
In sometimes productive ways, right? Sometimes healthy ways, because there's a lot of positive that can come from, you know, the community around a fan base, right? So let's not discredit that. A lot of positive,
of course,
but when it turns toxic, and the obsessing over scapegoating, right? Like waking up every morning and examining every property as to how it's, you know, bad for these reasons.
Well, the truth is that exists in literally every community. We should
absolutely.
Point that out.
Absolutely, and that's why, that exists in the community, that extreme, but it's no longer fringe. It's become like the go-to, right? So like here with Disconnected, for example, right? This is I'm gonna shamelessly plug you
on my show.
yeah. I'm just gonna go ahead and name drop you like right here. No, but like but for example, there are a large amount. There's a balance, it seems, that's a negative balance, where it's almost like for just as many, you know, objective, well-intentioned, I don't want to say well-intentioned, they're all well-intentioned in their own minds, but you have a lot more, for lack of a better way to explain it, vitriol has become accepted.
Right.
It's not a fringe thing. And so you have for every more objective, I don't know how to explain it, but like for every more objective kind of, you know, even keel, I guess is a good way to say it, even keel podcast about this hobby or that and hobby, right? You have, you know, the house is on fire, extreme vitriol. Right. You have that. Whereas years ago, that more extreme stuff wouldn't be so common.
So let's cover one more of these pet peeves in collecting. I'm going to say the next big one for me is a rare compliment I'm going to give to the Criterion Collection. And that is that their limited edition titles are not so limited. If they come out with something that is, you know, this fancy packaging, or you get a bonus with a movie or something like that, it tends to stay in print like that for quite a long time. And this is, you know, not to say that some of these labels that are small and independent should be forced to pay a ton of money on materials or anything like that. But I will say it really bugs me how we quickly lose booklets in many of these releases. There are many individuals that I know that write for these physical media releases that we love that get their stuff in the booklets, and they're only available for the first 1,000 copies, or on the high end, two or 3,000, or if you're some popular Vinegar Syndrome title, like 8 to 12,000. Those are huge releases, but for many of these smaller companies, it's one and done on a quick print run, and then those essays are gone forever. I would love to see those stick around.
Do that? Doesn't Indicator do that quite a bit?
Yeah, pretty much every single label that does booklets do that. Is the booklets are never in the standard editions.
Which to me from a consumer,
right?
Just speaking as a consumer, I think that it boosts when they have sales, and that's when they get a lot of people buying stuff.
Right.
Especially if they keep the any of these companies keep the standard pricing a little high, right? A little hot.
Yep.
I think when they have sales, it makes the sales more special when you're still getting that booklet.
True.
I think when they have the sale, you're still happy because of the price, but then you see they're like, but don't be counting on that booklet.
Right. And on the printed material cost side, I totally understand. Those booklets are much more expensive to print each than people think, probably. And I really think that the way Arrow Video used to do it was probably the best, perfect medium that we could have. They used to do the limited print run of the booklets. And so we'll say, I don't know, 3,000 titles came out and it had the booklet and the slipcover and all that fancy stuff. And then the standard came out and it lost the slipcover, lost the booklet. However, once that initial print run was gone, they took the booklet and uploaded it as a PDF to their website so that everybody could still go find the work that was done for it. They could still find the pre-written essays. Hell, if you really wanted, you could print it out and make your own booklet. You could literally download the PDF and craft your own booklet for your release and have it be the same. If you want to put the money into it, that's totally fine. But then that work is still preserved, at least online somewhere, for people to be able to enjoy. For whoever, I mean, Arrow paid somebody to write those essays. They should be available for people to do. I mean, you paid for the work. Let's see the fruits of that.
I mean, I think that's a very good idea, especially if people are, browsing titles to blind buy.
Yeah.
And then after a certain period of time, when people go to check out a movie on their website, the essay's right there for them to read about it, whether or not it has spoilers, whatever. But right. I think that's a classy move. I think that's a classy call on the part of Arrow.
Yeah.
I think that there's a balance, right, where the sooner or later all of these boutiques cry uncle and they have to have these sales, right? And
exactly.
And I think that from their point of view, it's like, all right, if we got to have these sales, if we're going to be offering this, and I want to say that I do question the intention of some of these companies actually turning a profit based on some of their just the way that they operate. But if you're going to give sales, right, you have to remove something.
Right.
Okay. And I understand that because their clientele, like we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, those first time adopters that want to get everything as soon as it comes out, you want them to always have something special that the people that buy it on sale don't get. Right. So then when they're talking in their little communities, they can be like, oh, well, I got it when it first came out. So I got the booklet, or I got the slipcover, or I got this, or I got that. I'm not sure about what do you think about the selling the slip covers separately thing? What's your opinion on that?
I mean, if if you're doing it later and somebody already has a copy of the movie, that's fine. And I also think it's a classy move to put up a standard edition the same day as the limited edition, rather than trying to sell out all the limited, immediately. What if somebody wants to get the release early, but they don't want to pay for all the bells and whistles like the booklet or the slipcover, and they just want the disc? That should totally be fine. I would love to see that. But yeah, if I don't know, if I'm a secondhand buyer and somebody had a standard edition of something and you have these slipcovers and booklets available for sale on their own, I might want to upgrade those. Maybe I have a standard edition of a film and I watch it and I go, holy shit, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I wish I had the full, complete, robust version, because this is now one of my favorite movies of all time. I would love the option to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, and I think that comes down to PR, right? I think it comes down to whether or not you announce.
Right.
You announce it from the outset, right?
Well,
I think people...
It's also that and warehouse space for the company, of course.
Right. Oh, yeah. There's a storage, logistics as well. But I think that people, if you release... like Pink Floyd got in a little trouble with that massively expensive and massive later years box set, in which they kind of made it. The narrative was that, hey, all of this extra great stuff on here, all these brand new remixes and all that, like this is 100% exclusive to this box set.
Right.
And then a year and a half down the road, they're pulling all the components out and selling them separately. So I think that, when you do it that way, I think you can get some pushback, and I think it's justified, right? Because it looks like you're, but when you're upfront and you say, hey, here's this deluxe box set of this, right? Sometime down the road, there will be a standard edition available, but if you want this, this is this, right? Yep. And I think that's the way you have to do it, instead of, trying to front like this is the only way you're going to be able to get it. And
Makes sense to me.
And then, Black Friday rolls around and you're like, oh, what do we have here?
Right. Titles that you can't get, that were only for sale for a limited time. And one of those is your film, Simple Like Silver, that Severin Films put out as part of the summer sale that they did in 2024. First of all, how's the reaction been to that?
The reaction to Simple Like Silver has been great. And, that was one of those films that was kind of like a bowling ball film. Like, It just kept knocking down pins, you know what I mean? And kept opening up doors for me. So, the main purpose of that release was that kind of what inspired me to make the film, or rather in earnest track down Christina and go on that adventure with her, was when Scorpion did that 30th anniversary release of Opera, and Christina Marcelek wasn't involved in it.
Right.
And I was like, this is absurd. Like, this is who you want. Like, all of this other stuff that they had on the box set, all of it's nice, but I mean, Christina's the juice. You know what I mean? And so me working with Severin on that, one of the main goal, right, was to release a version of the film, was to have a version of the film come out with Christina Marcelek on audio commentary and exclusive interviews with Christina, who has finally been open to talking about the film, right?
Breaking the silence.
Right. And I was like, just 4K isn't special enough. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I love all these other folks that are involved in the filmmaking process. They're great. You know what I mean? But you want the main people involved, right? Interviewing the publicist or the property master or the Key Electric. That's cool, right? They're all hardworking folks. They're all part of the magic. But having the star of the film, who, has kind of, been a recluse and hasn't spoken about the film in decades and wouldn't do interviews and all that, getting her, that was really important to me. Okay.
Of course.
They wound up pressing double the amount of movies we had originally agreed upon.
Right.
Okay. Which means that I got more complimentary copies of the film. So I come bearing gifts for the listeners. And today I am giving away 5 copies of Simple Like Silver. And I also want to go ahead and say that anybody else that has any questions about the Opera 4K set that was released, you can email Severin directly about that. If you want to ensure that, the disc and those issues they had were ironed out. And if you want to order Simple Like Silver, you can email Severin as well at the orders at severinfilms.com, whatever. It's on their website. All of your listeners know what that is. But you can email them directly if you want to order it. I am not sure as to when that is going to be rolled out beneficially again. I can't speak to that. But I do want to say that overall, bringing Christina Marcelek to the table for that 4K opera, release was the goal. Having my film, released as well was also magnificent. Glad it's out there. And certainly folks like you for keeping the magic alive. We need guys like you, Ryan.
Happy to. And same to you. For anybody that is interested in one of those copies of Simple Like Silver, you can check out the description below. We will be sending those out to you directly from me on behalf of Damian. So thank you, Damian, for donating those. And again, thank you for your time today. I know that it's been some ranting and raving from both of us, but it's something that's important. We got to point out some of the things that are negative sometimes too.
Thanks a lot for having me, Ryan. And everybody have a safe and wonderful holiday and a Merry Christmas.
You too, sir. We'll talk soon.
All right. Be good.
See ya. Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description